41 local COVID-19 infections, with 20 cases from unknown sources. The Hong Kong Book Fair postponed as the government is set to tighten social distancing measures. And China imposes sanctions on 4 US lawmakers and officials. Hello and a very good evening. The city reported 52 new COVID-19 cases today, with 41 of them being locally acquired infections. They include 20 cases with unknown sources.
Meanwhile, a patient who tested positive for COVID-19 yesterday had donated blood at the West Kowloon Donor Center. So far, one hospital patient has received part of his donation. Among the 41 local infections reported today, half of them stem from the previously known infection clusters, including eateries in Siwanshan, Tuen Mun, and an elderly care home. 4 people linked to Dim Sum Square in Sheungwan have tested positive for the virus, including the owner and staff of the shop. Another 20 cases have unknown sources of infection. Many of them are linked to restaurants. Most alarmingly, a patient who tested positive yesterday had donated blood at the Red Cross West Kowloon Donor Center last Sunday afternoon. During that time, 4 staff members had contact with him. The hospital authority confirmed that so far, 1 patient at Queen Elizabeth Hospital has received platelets from the donated blood, and the patient has been placed in isolation.
The chance of getting the infection through the blood is very, very low. People who are having different kinds of diseases in the hospital may need the red cells as well as may need the platelet. If there was no donations of blood in Hong Kong, the patients may not have blood transfusion for the illness. And then so we should balance the risk and the benefit.
Meanwhile, a 92-year-old woman with a chronic illness who was admitted to Queen Elizabeth Hospital came down with the virus. Over 50 medical personnel and patients who are considered her close contacts have been sent to quarantine centres or isolation wards. Also, a Prince of Wales hospital cleaning worker whose husband is among the infected taxi drivers reported earlier has initially tested positive for the virus.
As the city's running tally for COVID-19 infections topped 1,500, the government looks set to announce tougher anti-epidemic measures, possibly at the top of the hour.
Several health experts who advise the government on COVID-19 have called for a return of social distancing measures to March levels. Jacqueline has that story.
As the third wave of COVID-19 bears down on the city, salvos of cases have emerged in different districts and sectors. Seeing that, Dr. David Hui of the Chinese University's Faculty of Medicine, who is also a member of the government's expert advisory panel, has called for more draconian measures. That's especially when he cites 30% of the local cases are untraceable.
We should tighten because we are now having a major outbreak. Over the weekend, I could see the crowding in the restaurants. That would increase the risk of spreading in the community.
Hui suggested slashing the maximum number of diners per table from the current 8 to 4 to 6. He added flexi hours and work-from-home arrangements for civil servants, university staff, and private corporations would help tamp down the pandemic spread. That's an appeal echoed by University of Hong Kong microbiologist Yun Kwok-yong. In response, Undersecretary for Food and Health Choi Tak-yi has hinted on an imminent tightening of social distancing measures. Some restaurant owners can't be more worried. He says if restrictions on eateries return to March levels, it would deal a severe blow to their already measly income. And if only takeouts are allowed, he believes over 90% of the eateries may shutter for good. Late March, the government introduced a raft of anti-epidemic measures. They included capping the number of diners per table at 4 and having the eatery seating capacity. Entertainment venues including cinemas, gyms, and party rooms had to suspend their operations. The gathering ban of 4 or more people was in place but relaxed in past months in phases. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Well, the organizer of the annual Hong Kong Book Fair has decided to postpone the event, which was scheduled to start on Wednesday. The Hong Kong Trade Development Council said it's decided to reschedule the book fair in view of the difficulty to impose disease control measures and contact tracing. The move follows calls for a postponement from hundreds of exhibitors, but the new date has yet to be announced. 3 other public fairs and expos during the same period have already been rescheduled. Some stakeholders approve of the postponement, but hope it won't affect government subsidies for participating exhibitors.
It is very high risk because of the very frequent contact between participants. I also call upon the government to address the need of the participants, I mean all those participating publishers, on the potential loss.
The resumption of Mark 6 draws will be further delayed because of the worsening COVID-19 situation. The Hong Kong Jockey Club originally planned to resume the draw on July 21st, but now it will remain suspended until further notice. The Jockey Club also confirmed one of its members who visited the sports complex of the Happy Valley Clubhouse on Shan Kwong Road had tested positive for COVID-19. The member did not enter the main building of the clubhouse. The sports complex is now closed for disinfection, while staff members were arranged to get tested and undergo 14 days of quarantine.
And now to news about the coronavirus elsewhere. The World Health Organization reported a record increase in global coronavirus cases, with the total rising by more than 230,000. The worldwide tally is almost 13 million. More than 565,000 have died from COVID-19 around the world. China reported 8 new infections on Monday, all imported, as domestic community infections fall to near zero. The latest death toll, 4,634 out of 83,602 infections since the virus was first detected in Wuhan late last year. India's coronavirus caseload is nearing 900,000 after a record surge of 28,701 cases. Several Indian states imposed weekend curfews and locked down high-risk areas as infections increase. Australia's most populous state, New South Wales, reported 14 new cases. A cluster is linked to a pub used by freight drivers travelling the country, adding to fears of a second wave of infections. Neighbouring Victoria State forced about 5 million people back into lockdown after a surge of cases there last week.
In the U.S., the virus is showing no sign of slowing down. Florida shattered a record, reporting more than 15,000 new confirmed cases Sunday.
The startling new numbers come as the government debates how to reopen schools. Peter Gaveas has details.
New cases of COVID-19 continue to break state records. Florida reported 15,000 new cases Sunday. That is the largest one-day increase of any state since the pandemic began. The latest rise comes a day after Walt Disney World in Orlando reopened with a limited number of guests. All were welcome with a host of safety measures, including masks and temperature checks. But not everyone wants to wear a face covering. Some residents in Martin County, Florida, held a "I will not comply" rally after local officials issued a mandate that masks be worn in public places and businesses. The protest occurred a day before the record case count in the state.
I have a mask in my pocket. There are times that I think you should. There are times that I think you shouldn't. However, I do also believe that it's my responsibility to take care of my health and not anybody else's to tell me.
The record infections come as the Trump administration renewed its push for schools to reopen. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi accused President Donald Trump of messing with children's health. The Democratic House of Representatives leader criticized the Trump administration for advocating a return to school in the fall as coronavirus infections surge across the country. She said federal guidelines on reopening schools amid the coronavirus outbreak should be mandatory. Trump last week attacked the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the federal government's health protection agency, for school reopening guidelines that he said were too tough, expensive, and impractical. The country's education secretary, Betsy DeVos, repeatedly refused to say if states and school districts should follow CDC guidelines. She also failed to put forth any other blueprint for safe school reopenings, saying there was no single solution. Peter Corvallis, TVB News.
On to other news now, and China says it will ban several US lawmakers and officials from entering the country after the United States penalized senior Chinese officials over the treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. The sanctions have targeted US Senators Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, as well as Representative Chris Smith and Ambassador for Religious Freedom Sam Brownback. The Foreign Ministry in Beijing says actions by the US had seriously damaged Sino-US relations and that China is determined to uphold its national sovereignty against what it sees as interference in its internal affairs. At least 21 people were injured in an explosion and fire on board an amphibious assault vessel at a US Navy base in San Diego. Navy officials say the injuries are not life-threatening. One Navy official suspects the blast and the subsequent fire began in a lower cargo hold of the USS Bonhomme Richard, where marine equipment and vehicles are stored. The flames sent up a huge plume of dark smoke visible around San Diego. The cause of the explosion and fire is under investigation.
Still ahead on tonight's news. Britain to spend over £700 million on border infrastructure to keep trade flowing between the UK and Europe. A surge in the number of travellers from Hong Kong to the mainland. And pictures of a newly discovered comet streaking past Earth. Welcome back to TVB News. France and Britain have signed an agreement to share intelligence in their joint fight against the human traffickers who are smuggling migrants across the English Channel.
It comes as the UK begins to unveil plans for its border with Europe after Brexit is completed. Despite Brexit souring Britain's relations with the rest of Europe, the UK is trying to work with its European neighbours on some key issues, such as human trafficking. Britain's Home Secretary and her French counterpart signed an agreement to set up a French-British intelligence unit that would allow for better exchanges of information about human smuggling networks. This would help the two countries better control the flow of illegal migration at their respective borders. And that's not all. The UK government also announced it would spend £705 million on border infrastructure to keep trade flowing after its transition deal with the European Union expires at the end of the year. Britain's Chief Cabinet Secretary explained why this was happening.
They wanted us to be in a position where we could trade with our neighbours in Europe, yes, but also have new trading relationships with other countries. In order to do that, that means that we need to have our borders upgraded in order to facilitate that trade. It's also the case that we want to make sure that we can have tough and secure borders to deal with organised crime and other security threats.
The funding includes £470 million to build port and inland infrastructure, including in the southeast of England, to serve major freight crossings to France. The UK, which is still in talks with the EU about a post-Brexit trade deal, said it would shortly set out in detail how the British-EU border would operate. But concerns have been raised by other members of the British government about whether the ports and associated infrastructure will be ready in time, as well as the potential legal challenges to the border changes. Poland's Conservative President Andrzej Duda has narrowly won a second five-year term in a bitterly fought election. The State Electoral Commission said Duda had won 51.2% of the vote based on a count from districts. He defeated the mayor of Warsaw, Rafał Trzaskowski, who trailed with 48.79% of the vote. The final results will be announced later. Duda, backed by the right-wing Law and Justice Party, campaigned on traditional values and expanding popular social spending policies. His opponent represented the centrist Civic Platform Party and had vowed to protect the country's democratic values.
A funeral ceremony was held at Seoul City Hall today for the late mayor Park Won-soon. Only about 100 people, including family members, officials and lawmakers, were invited due to coronavirus measures. The funeral was live-streamed on the web for those that could not attend. Park was one of the country's most prominent elected officials and longtime mayor of the South Korean capital. He was found dead on a mountain in northern Seoul last Friday after his daughter reported him missing. There was no sign of foul play. He left a note thanking and apologizing to everyone. The apparent suicide came after one of Park's former secretaries filed a complaint alleging that the 64-year-old sexually harassed her. Immigration authorities reported a spike in travelers from Hong Kong to the mainland the past week. The increase has been spurred by the recent resurgence of COVID-19 infections in the city. Dong Yaonie explains.
An unexpected scene at the Shenzhen Bay checkpoint this morning. Long queues of people waiting to leave for the mainland. These as the mandatory quarantine remains in place. Some say they are leaving due to Hong Kong's escalating COVID-19 outbreak and are losing trust in the authorities to curb new infections. This man says the government's lax surveillance has led to many imported cases in the SAR. Another resident says he feels Shenzhen is safer than Hong Kong because the epidemic has been under control there. He has more confidence in the mainland city than the SAR on stemming the coronavirus. Immigration data shows only hundreds of Hong Kongers enter the mainland each day through the Shenzhen Bay port earlier this month. But the number has been surging the past week. It topped 2,000 last Saturday, a 3-month high since border controls were implemented. Current immigration measures in Shenzhen require inbound travelers to fill in health declaration forms and pass temperature checks. They also have to quarantine for 14 days in government-designated hotels at their own expense. Some people can apply to undergo a home quarantine. Those include pregnant women, patients with chronic diseases, seniors aged 70 or above, and their travel companions. Dong Yaonie, TVB News.
More than 600,000 people voted in the pro-democracy camp's primary elections for the September LegCo polls. Organisers described the turnout as a miracle and vowed to fight for democracy in the city despite mounting pressure from local authorities and Beijing. Pinky Wong with details.
Hong Kong people has made history again. Another miracle happened in Hong Kong. The significance of this result is not merely a process for Hong Kong, for the democratic camp to select their candidates to run in the official election. Hong Kong people, after all these years, since 2013, we have demonstrated to the world and also to the authority that we have not given up to strive for democracy for Hong Kong. Even though the new national security law has been enacted.
Over the weekend, more than 590,000 people cast electronic votes and around 21,000 voted with paper ballots in polling stations across the city. The turnout, with more than 610,000 votes collected, far exceeded the estimates of 170,000. The attempt is to narrow the field for pro-democracy candidates in this September's LegCo elections, with the CAIM aiming to secure the majority of more than 35 seats. But this primary selection process does not mean candidates will be able to stand. In recent years, multiple pro-democracy candidates were disqualified by returning officers.
Under the present situation of Hong Kong, for those who won in the primary elections, they may not even be able to run in the official election because the returning officer may arbitrarily exercise his or her power to disqualify them from running in the official election.
The activist believes if this happens, it will send a clear message to the international community.
If we have all our candidates at the end disqualified, actually the act of disqualifying them by itself will tell the whole world how the authority has used their powers arbitrarily to infringe the basic rights of Hong Kong people.
Pinky Wong, TVB News.
A newly discovered comet is streaking past Earth, providing a stunning show for stargazers. Comet Neowise swept within Mercury's orbit a week ago. Its close proximity to the Sun caused dust and gas to burn off its surface and create an even bigger debris tail. Now the comet is headed our way, with its closest approach in 2 weeks. NASA's Neowise infrared space telescope discovered the comet in March. Scientists say the comet is 5 kilometers wide. Its nucleus is covered with sooty material dating back to the origin of our solar system 4.6 billion years ago. The comet will be visible around the world until mid-August, when it heads back towards the outer solar system. That's the news. Thanks for watching.
Bye for now. Good night.